Hey, you're finally awake.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are continuing our celebration of Bethesda Game Studios' first brand new IP in 25 years, Starfield, by going through their catalog of games. In our last video, we did a full deep dive on the entirety of the Fallout franchise, my personal favorite in all of gaming. Now we're moving to another favorite of mine, surprise, surprise, in The Elder Scrolls. The following video is brought to you by Milanote. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm working on a video game and I use Milanote every single day to communicate ideas visually to my team. And I'm gonna show you exactly what I do and what is probably the craziest sponsorship of my life. So what I've set up here is an example mood board. So under here, I have an example of Mr. House that I'm gonna put together for you all to sort of show how it could be done. Now, in some instances, some characters are brought together through real life examples. Like you have Howard Hughes here on the left, and then you have Mr. House here, and the inspiration is clear. However, let's say the more hard to replicate in a reality version of Mr. House is something you have to show off in your game, but you can't just find a real life comparison for that. So I grabbed a few images. I grabbed one of a zombie. I grabbed one of wrinkled skin because that's a key feature, right? And you want to kind of describe the idea of the pod he's in. So there are these more hibernation pods that I found online. And this is all used to communicate an idea. And then you can use your words here and connect the dots. So to make sure that these are all associated, like I drag these arrows here, you can put a note here and just mention focus on the pod. Or you could actually label the images itself and kind of describe, let's say I wanted to create something more Mr. House inspired. I'd say something like, we want to do a Mr. House style pod. But it goes beyond that. Let's say I was trying to organize this and we said, these are Mr. House characteristics. And you could actually line these all up into one, keep those arrows attached, and organize it here. I mean, I cannot, if you are a creative person or you're running your own business, this is a must-have. It is incredible. I cannot emphasize how helpful Milanote has been for me when it comes to organization and getting the team on the same page. So shout out to Milanote for sponsoring today's video. Sign up to Milanote for free using my link in the description down below. Much like Fallout, every single Elder Scrolls game is different, and we're gonna highlight that today. But ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of Elder Scrolls games. So let's not delay any further and get right into it. If you're new here and you're into nostalgic and retrospective content, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. Let's begin with a weird one. The Elder Scrolls Chapter 1, The Arena. Yeah, so first time trying this out. Wow, humble beginnings to say the least. It's really cool to look at a game like Skyrim and then go back and play a game like Elder Scrolls, The Arena. See where all the lore began, see where all of the gameplay identity began, and to witness its transformation over the years is staggering. You see, my first introduction to Elder Scrolls, like many out there, was Morrowind, and even between this one and Morrowind, you can see a little bit of the DNA carrying over, but oh my gosh, does it feel totally different. From the controls where I have to click parts of the screen to rotate and move forward, you'll see as the arrows change, to clicking on items to pick them up, slowly navigating through my inventory, and even holding the right click and then swiping my mouse to attack in different directions. It was a very interactive adventure to say the least, but it plays more like a first-person dungeon crawler, which I guess does carry over when you look at some of the later Elder Scrolls games. Some of my favorite memories of Skyrim, as we'll get into, is crawling through the various dungeons that world had and finding unique loot that's in there, whether it be the Nightingale armor, which would come from the Thieves Guild questline, or the Mace of Molag Bal being one of my favorites. I adore the dungeon crawling aspect of Elder Scrolls without being too Borderlandsy looty, if you catch my drift, and I feel like this game captures that well. Otherwise, as someone going back to it though, it's definitely more of an interesting experiment rather than a like, hey, you should go and play this. But what you could go ahead and check out is the next one, The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall is still fascinating even to this day because of its sheer scope and scale. Now, it begins much like the Elder Scrolls Arena. You start your life in a prison, a common theme throughout most of the Elder Scrolls franchise, but it's upon exiting that prison and beginning your journey, that you learn about how truly staggering the scale of this game is. You see, Daggerfall boasts over 15,000 cities, villages, and towns across multiple provinces within Tamriel, something that I feel like we're going to see a little bit of a spiritual successor to in the Elder Scrolls 6. While that's a game that continues to elude us, when I was playing Starfield, I couldn't help but think of Daggerfall, the constant sense of scale being in your face, every planet being a little bit different, whether it be a barren rock or something full of life, was dependent on how you approached its map and what you eventually stumbled into. I've always had this crazy prediction that I feel the Elder Scrolls 6, with how long it's been and how much the stakes have risen, is going to be the entirety of Tamriel. When you look at how many planets there are in Starfield, I feel like the next step in that scale is creating the entire Tamriel for the Elder Scrolls 6 for us to explore. Something that we know Elder Scrolls Online is currently accomplishing, but more on that in a little bit. Daggerfall is mind-blowing for its time. The fact that the game is this big and you throw this many hours into it is fascinating. Not only that, but there are better control adjustments, to be quite frank. I really like how in Daggerfall I could use my mouse to look around and use WSAD to walk around. It made the game a lot more approachable. But what I love more, and what's consistent with Elder Scrolls up until Oblivion, is creating your own class, naming your own class, picking your favorite primary skills, major skills, minor skills, and creating your own character based off the province you're from, having characters treat you differently based off where you're from, and also discovering some new classes that I don't quite recall in the Elder Scrolls, like the Burglar. I thought that was kind of interesting, and so I played as one. I just love how many different ways you can go about Daggerfall. There's really no game outside of Starfield that I can think of that matches its sense of scale, and the fact that this game is so old, yes, you can look at the graphics and whatnot and kind of shoulder shrug it, but it is truly impressive what this game does. Now, the next Elder Scrolls game, how do I put this nicely? Yeah, I can't find the nice words here. Let's talk about the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard.
You little bastard, you're rusty. Move on. Not a good hit, but it will do. No! Get to his other side. Hit, but it won't.
So, kind of pirate-faring adventure with very awkward voice acting, third-person, awkward action combat. It may be a guilty pleasure to some out there, but to go from this hardcore role-playing franchise to this is about as big of a shakeup as I can think of in the modern age, like going from Fallout 3 and New Vegas and 4 into 76 and going, wait, what is this? Now, I like that Redguard explores a particular part of the lore. I think it's something that could be very vital moving into the Elder Scrolls 6, but this was a weird one, no doubt about it. And out of every game we're gonna go through in this list, and I mean every game, not every version of Skyrim though, Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard stands out as one of the strangest Elder Scrolls games to be created. I view this a bit like what happened with the Fallout franchise. Remember how I was talking about Fallout 1 and 2, traditional hardcore role-playing games? Okay, how do we break out and do something popular? And you go down this route. You make something along the lines of a action RPG and see where it goes. But there's a ton of dialogue in this game, make no mistake, which is pretty impressive for its time. So it's not all bad. I wouldn't call it a terrible game, just what you've come to know and love, and especially following up Daggerfall, you were kind of destined for failure, but at least doing something people were familiar with could have helped things out. But yeah, Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, kind of a big miss. Okay, now we can really get into the retro rebound rhythm. As you may have noticed, your boy didn't have any complete in-box copies for those games, but what we're all set up with is this era of Elder Scrolls games and on. Let's talk about the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. This was the most pivotal game in the company's history. You see, I mentioned how Elder Scrolls 1 and 2 were these hardcore RPGs, and they weren't necessarily breaking out to the broader audience to give Bethesda some cash flow. You look at something like the Elder Scrolls Adventure, and yeah, that wasn't breaking out either. And then you look at all of the titles that they were publishing. They were making Terminator games, they were making Wayne Gretzky hockey. None of these were panning out. Bethesda's back was against the wall. And enter the man who needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyway, Todd Howard. This is the first Todd Howard video game, if you will. And this is the game, Morrowind, that saved the company Bethesda. Without this game, you don't get Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, 76. You don't get Starfield. Because of this game right here, it is owed everything. And it's one of Bethesda's best works. It was a breakout console exclusive on the original Xbox. And now we can still celebrate it to this day thanks to backwards compatibility. So let's talk about Morrowind. I remember my first introduction to this game like it was yesterday. I visited my childhood best friend's house, and it was there he was playing as a dark elf roaming around Balmora, and I was like, okay, this looks kind of cool. I want to try it out. Now, silly me thinking I was going to get into a fun little action game. Yeah, I was very confused. My child brain was very confused when I picked up a sword and I started swinging at enemies, and all I heard was, I was like, what? Why am I not making contact? I'm right here. I'm swinging the sword in your face. And this is something my child brain just could not process. It was that game, and it was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I'm swinging the weapon at you. Why am I missing so much? And I just couldn't put it together. So Morrowind was a game that I actually bounced off of quite a bit until I found a little cheat code that you could use online that would allow you to restore your health and your mana and your stamina. So I would just use that over and over and over and abuse it and just explore the map and kill everything and loot everything. And I had a blast playing this way. But what's funny is Morrowind still to this day, as someone who's always talked about and covered everything Bethesda Game Studios, stands as the only BGS game I've never completed. That's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, you could also include like Arena and Daggerfall in that batch, but I'm talking about traditional, pivotal BGS games. This one I've never finished. I've put dozens and dozens of hours into it, but I've never beat it. Still, it's a game I infinitely respect. I love the introduction. Again, this was my first time interacting as a kid with create your own class. I would never pick the assassin or the archer. No, I need to make my own. And so I made my Toddfather class this time around. Combining that with picking your sign, and there were just so many builds that you could do in Morrowind, it was scary. Not only was that scary, but the amount of dialogue in this game is equal parts scary. You'll click on one word of interest and it'll load up your entire dialogue log. Perhaps what makes people bounce off Morrowind the most nowadays is the navigation. Our brains have been trained to just follow the waypoint. And so games that say, nope, sorry, we don't got that for you, are ones that people infinitely struggle with. And Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind is that kind of game. You want to know where to go? Check your journal. You want to fast travel? Go find a rider somewhere. Go teleport through one of the guilds. That's your way of getting around quickly. Not opening a map and fast traveling, there's a load screen. It was all in-world stuff. You want to make sure you're going the right way? Make sure, for example, if the log says the stream is on your right, when there's a fork in the road, make a left. You got to do that step by step by step. For me, what happens is it breaks up the gameplay a little too often where I'm 1, 2, 3, check log. 1, 2, 3, check log. And I just keep opening my journal again and again and again. But there's something irresistible about Morrowind, because as you get above the power curve, as you find those secret items or have those crazy secret encounters like this, as you get stronger, there's just something irresistible. As you get more powerful, let's say you get your short blade skill up and you start swinging and most of those swings are making contact. It is an undeniably incredible feeling watching your build come to fruition. But it's gonna come with a lot of trial, tribulation, and death, no doubt about it. Now, what's interesting also about Morrowind is there's a lot of dungeons to explore with their own little gimmicks. It's just an incredible game for its time, much like we said with Daggerfall, but sometimes there's a right place and a right time. Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind's right place was on the original Xbox, and in the right time was 2003, and it was the game of the year that year. And now it's time for our first complete in-box experience of the video with the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, which is a fat one, if I do say so myself. Here we have a complete in-box copy of the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind Game of the Year edition. This may look familiar if you're an old school Retro Rebound viewer. This is one of our first like dozen or so videos on this channel when it was first born. So you may remember this one. It's that exact same copy. So here on the back, we have a lot of text to go through with 100 plus hours of exciting new gameplay from the Blood Moon and Tribunal expansions, which I go through here. But here on the top, it says the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind is the most detailed game world ever created, where you create and play any kind of character you can imagine. Morrowind sets a new standard in gaming with its incredible graphics, in-depth gameplay, and innovative character development. Here it breaks down the Morrowind experience, where it says, compatible with the original Morrowind, start a new game of Morrowind or continue your existing save game and experience all new challenges for your character. So this is kind of like the re-release, but it's the definitive edition, if you will. You also have here on the back Tribunal, visit the capital city of Mournhold, the clockwork city of Sothasil, each complete with new creatures and much more. You also have Blood Moon, venture to the frozen island of Solstheim, filled with even more challenges for high-level characters, or become a werewolf and indulge in your thirst for the hunt. It actually kind of reminds me of Skyrim, where they had a DLC that brought you back to a part of Morrowind. Anyway, on the inside here, we got a lot. We have a lot. We have cool slips like this, such as promoting the Game of the Year edition walkthrough. You have the software registration card. Always love finding these. Inside, you have the very thick manual. But first, what I'll show you is this little map here that every single complete in-box copy of Elder Scrolls, either 3, 4, or 5 came with. You can see Vardenfell, you can see Solstheim, and the list goes on. So yeah, it came with a full-on map, which is always awesome. These are actually maps that I hung up on my wall when I was in my parents' house in like high school. So continuing on, we also have this very thick manual here, which was really helpful as a kid. I distinctly remember when I was deciding what character I wanted to create, going through all the races, because it breaks down their skill bonuses, their specials for each and every single one. You'll see here from the Redguard to the Wood Elf to the Nord, Khajiits, my favorite being the Khajiits. I always build Khajiits. And so on. You also get an idea of what the attributes are. They break down the combat art and magic arts. These are really important because you got to find out what their governing attributes are, so when you build your character, you know what factors into what. The classes themselves are pretty useful here, but I always built my own, as I mentioned. There's stealth arts here, magic specialized classes. There was just so much character building here. The birth signs, of course. They break down weapons that you're going to find and what kind of damage type they are, whether it be thrusting, slashing, chopping, and so on. They go through the layered armor system, something that we didn't see in a Bethesda Game Studios game up until Fallout 4 was the next time we saw that. So this was a pretty unique mechanic here where you could wear all different types of like pauldrons and chest pieces and then have a different layer of clothing beneath it so you could kind of stylize to your desire. We also have here, continuing on, magic, breaking all of that down, whether it be restoration or destruction or illusion or mysticism, alteration, just so many schools of magic items. Just what a really fun universe. Spell making is here as well. I think it's in Oblivion where it takes off. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Enchanting items, alchemy. I mean, this game, what couldn't it do at its time? They break down the dialogue system naturally. Just lots and lots to read here. And then you get to the back and there are the controls on the S controller there. So that is a complete in-box copy of Morrowind. Now it's time, ladies and gentlemen. This is where my Bethesda Game Studios adventure began with the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Oblivion was unlike anything I played at the time. You see, I was a late adopter to the Xbox 360. I was busy playing Kingdom Hearts 2 up until about 2008, 2009. You'll have to excuse me, I was enjoying some peak fiction. Now, with that in mind, eventually a friend told me about Call of Duty World at War. I saw Samurai Warriors 2 Empires on the 360, and I saw Resident Evil 5, and those were the games that convinced me to pick up a 360. I also stumbled upon Mass Effect 1, so there's that at least. You can't hold that all against me, all right? But there was one game that I randomly bought at GameStop one day, And it was a game that I remember while everyone was sitting in Call of Duty lobbies in the Xbox Live party chats, you know, the old Xbox Live party UI where it says what game you're playing, and it aligned up with Call of Duty, and then there was my gamer tag, and what I was grinding for months and months and months was none other than the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Yo, Matt, get off that whack game. No, I am playing one of the greatest things ever made. Excuse me while I enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion was a game changer. One thing I haven't mentioned quite yet is that Bethesda Game Studios has a knack for punching above their weight, something that would eventually gobble them up a bit as development became more expensive and time-consuming. But around this era, this is where Bethesda Game Studios was just pulling off some serious sorcery. With a team of just around 100 people, they made a game with 300 plus dungeons, a major set of quest lines from the main story to the Dark Brotherhood to the Thieves Guild to the Mages Guild, Warriors Guild, and the list goes on. It was a seismic video game that you could crawl through for 300 plus hours and still have stuff to do. And for me, as a kid with zero responsibilities in about 8th grade, oh, was I loving every second of it. Now, what was also equal parts impressive but hasn't aged as well with Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion is that every single dungeon that you find in this game was built by one person. Yeah, 300 plus dungeons, one person. Pretty impressive. Now, that was back then. Nowadays, you go through them and you go, ah, this is the same cave as the other 8 I explored. And, oh, the Alien Ruins, yeah, I've seen these before, and oh, this castle looks exactly the same. Eventually, that dungeon crawling experience begins to fade, and this is another game you're gonna see a lot of Starfield in. Like, a lot of the dungeons and the repeat assets remind me so much of Oblivion, for better or for worse, in Starfield. And so, as I was going through that game, I couldn't help but reflect on this, where it all began, even down to the awkward conversation system. You see, gone from Morrowind was the big text boxes and clicking on keywords and investigating that way through reading, and now voice acting, eyebrow bumps, and eyes darting around galore. This is Oblivion. You also had one of the craziest persuasion mini games imaginable, where you would see all these different facial expressions. Bethesda clearly loved it at the time, and it was a novel concept, but yeah, again, hindsight, not that great. But I don't want to just talk down on Oblivion in hindsight. You see, this features one of the best quest lines ever, and that's the Dark Brotherhood. The Dark Brotherhood in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion has moments that are like Danganronpa. I love the "you sleep quite soundly for a murderer." This game just has so many iconic lines attached to it. Stop right there, criminal.
Stop right there, criminal scum. Nobody breaks the law on my watch.
Oh, and the adoring fan is from this game. I mean, just there were so many top gamer moments that are found here in Oblivion. But perhaps one of my favorites is the mechanic that is allowing you to create your own spells. Something that we haven't seen in the Elder Scrolls franchise since, but man, that made Oblivion special. It also made you want to do a magic build all the time, but I digress. I loved Oblivion's leveling by doing system. I felt like it was the right hybrid, that Skyrim went more in the direction of perks, and I feel like with Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, it went more in the direction of you're gonna really stink at first, but as you do and get lucky and hit those dice rolls, you will then get really good. So it depends what kind of progression you liked. I think Oblivion found the right middle spot. It could be a simple action game, but as you strategize your build and do certain things, you'll gradually increase those skills, like jumping around all over the map will increase your acrobatics. Great. What are you going to do when you start to scale up from apprentice to journeyman and master and so on? How are you going to spend as you level up? This game did let you hit that level of what I call Bethesda God mode, where you're just unstoppable, but at the same time, keeping it, I think, well balanced. When you mix in a plethora of dungeons to crawl through, lots of enemies to kill, lots of great loot, fantastic voice acting, sub-iconic names like Sean Bean. I mean, you just have so much here in Oblivion that is hard to wrap your head around at the time for a team of just about 100 people. And then don't even get me started on the DLC. I say that for better or for worse. You get the horse armor DLC, but you also get, DLC like Shivering Isles, which is one of the best expansions ever made. So why don't we go ahead and check out another thick complete in-box copy, and then talk about the game that some of you may be sick of, but not me. Okay, here we have Oblivion, Game of the Year edition, including Knights of the Nine and Shivering Isles. The back of the box says Oblivion, Knights of the Nine and Shivering Isles. This should look familiar because, yeah, it kind of has the same layout as Morrowind. So the Game of the Year editions typically do this. It says the complete Oblivion collection. The Game of the Year edition includes the original game alongside the 2 DLC that I just went over. And then the breakdowns. Oblivion, with the Empire ready to crumble, the gates of Oblivion open and demons march upon the lands. You must find the lost heir to the throne and unravel the sinister plot that threatens to destroy all of Tamriel. I feel like the Oblivion gates were really cool at first. Like, even back then, they were super cool, but over time, you got lost really easily, didn't you? So, just like one of those parts of the game that also I didn't think aged spectacularly, but I love the storyline in this game. Like, to me, I call it a BGS classic. Like, in the terms of standard compelling stories, maybe it's not that wonderful, but I always found it to be one that I remember so fondly. Maybe because it's my first real BGS game. You also have the Knights of the Nine here. A fallen knight has been unchained from the darkness of Oblivion and seeks vengeance upon the gods who banished them. Only a champion pure of heart can vanquish the evil that has been released upon the land. And then Shivering Isles. Enter the torn realm of Sheer-Gorath, a world where mania and dementia reign. Do you have the strength to survive his trials, to tame a realm fraught with paranoia and despair, and wear the mantle of a god? Really cool expansion. And then on the inside, you got 2 discs here, which is beautiful. Again, the tradition continues on. You have an entire map of the Empire here, which, again, just look at this, man. Just so cool. They have the province of Cyrodiil here. Wonderful stuff. And again, these are ones I want to frame and hang up on the wall at some point. But let's take a look at the manual, which is, again, quite thick. Bethesda Game Studios, known for their games, but not their manuals. But their manuals are indeed peak. So let's go through another peak one here. So crawling through it all, you're going to see a lot of similar stuff from the Morrowind manual, given that, of course, it's the sequel, so it's going to share a lot of elements there, but it's breaking down stuff that's new, like maps and quests here, and how it actually uses a map and known location and waypoints. Like I said, with Morrowind, you kind of just had to wander and find your way about. Here they have the race breakdowns. They still have the more hardcore role-playing elements, you know, what the skill bonuses per race were, the special traits per race were, and so on and so forth. Much cooler art. I love the little illustrations here for each one, whereas Morrowind used the in-game model, so I appreciate the extra effort here. They break down the attributes once more and what those bars are assigned to. They go through the skills that you'll see. Again, the art just is beautiful in this, not really reusing anything from the game's assets, but making their own, which I thought was really cool. Attention to detail here. Again, the stealth skills, leveling up once more. They break down your classes once more. Just what a fantastic game, man. I just had such a blast with this one. The arts of combat, see, it's the exact same one. It was really just a true sequel in every conceivable way. The arts of the magic, as you would expect, the restoration, the mysticism, alteration, alchemy, magic items. Looking familiar yet? Yeah, this is exactly pretty much the same thing. And then you have the Game of the Year guide here in the back and the gameplay controls once more. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a beautiful complete in-box copy of Oblivion on the Xbox 360. Skyrim, where would I be without it? Not here, that's for dang sure. Ladies and gentlemen, I failed the class because of this game. I remember it as clear as yesterday, and it's a long story, so buckle in. I was taking a computer art class, and it was there that when the computers were to my disposal in my junior year of high school, I thought, you know, it'd be cool, instead of doing my work, reading the same Skyrim previews for the 8th millionth time. I don't know what was wrong with me. Actually, I do know. I had Skyrim fixation, clear as day. And when that game came out, I threw so much of my life at it, to the point where, yeah, I failed that class, actually. Not something to be entirely proud of, but here's how it panned out. So a lot of my time was spent on this game making rare weapon and armor guides that you can still find on YouTube to this day on my Mr. Matty Plays channel, from the Mace of Molag Bal and every Daedric artifact all the way up to the Dragonborn expansions. I was making guides for this game consistently. It was my first springboard moment on YouTube. It was the reason I had any sort of Bethesda related audience that would eventually transition into my coverage of Fallout 4. And it actually led to one of many fork in the road moments in my life. So there I was taking another class in this computer room with the same teacher, and the teacher actually approaches me and goes, I don't think you're cut out for this, Matt. I think you should quit this class, and I'm not exaggerating for the camera. That's what he said to me. Because what did I do? I showed up, I failed, I clearly didn't care, I wasn't as responsible as I should have been, and so he said, go on, get out of here. And I had a choice there, and I think maybe he could have been challenging me, but me and my stubborn ways back then, I went, okay, peace out, screw yourself. And I went in this direction, towards YouTube, as an almost prove-it moment. Now, I have yet to see this colossal douchebag again in my lifetime, but that's for another day. Ladies and gentlemen, I won. That's all that matters. Anyway, it's nothing to be proud of, and my parents were very upset with me, but point being is that Skyrim was the game that led to the YouTube springboard here for Mr. Matty, and then eventually Retro Rebound down the line. And this was a game that was life-changing to me. Not only because of my career, but really also because of my fascination with video games getting on more of an enthusiast level. I was starting to read previews, engage with reviews, engage in the discourse of the gaming community, and start sharing my own voice. The way I was hunting down all of these unique weapons that I thought were so cool, that was born for me in Oblivion and Fallout 3. It was my favorite thing about exploring dungeons in Bethesda Game Studios games, was wondering what was at the tail end of it. What unique effect did that weapon or piece of armor have? And Skyrim just took that and ran 80,000 miles with it beyond anything that we've ever seen from BGS since. This is my favorite game when it comes to just exploring and finding cool loot. I mentioned the Nightingale armor set earlier in this video. That is one of the most dope looking armor sets I think we have seen in gaming. And the fact that as I get close to enemies, a black mist comes off of it and damages them over time. I don't care if it tanks my frames on the 360. I love that that was even a unique effect that that piece of armor had. And the game is full of things like that. It's what I loved about combing through every corner of Skyrim, doing every single quest line. It just felt like there was something to explore, and it figured out how to do dungeons well. This was the first game I played that every dungeon was a loop. Every dungeon, by the end of it, I put in quotes, it either led straight out or there was a hidden door or latch that you would pull to lead you right to the beginning. You'd go, what? That was there the whole time? It was consistently incredible with its scale, its scope. Note how this is a trend from Daggerfall and on. This whole series is defined by scale and scope, and Skyrim is everything, man. I know we're a little sick of it with the special edition and VR, and the list goes on. They had an Alexa version. Bethesda's leaned into it as, haha, a meme. Make us more money. Here's the anniversary edition. I know it's gotten a little out of hand, but people keep buying it, and there's a reason for it. I'm not trying to excuse a corporate practice here, but yeah, Skyrim is extremely dang good. But what really captured me with Skyrim was that limitless freedom. And I have to quote Todd Howard here. You see that mountain? You can go there. And it was true. Every mountaintop I saw, I would climb to the top and I'd be like, I can go here. I'm gonna go to that one over there. And I'd just go down the hill, up the big mountain again. I'd be at the top and go, I can't believe this. Eventually you'd find the borders of the map, but continuously my little junior year in high school mind was blown by this game. Not only by the fact that I had gotten some sense of relevancy on YouTube with people who loved what I loved. I thought I was alone on this with liking these rare weapons and armor, but also my mind was blown that a game could be this big and this good. The last time I felt that way was Oblivion. With that, let's take a look at a really nice complete in box copy of Skyrim and then move on to a very interesting era now of Elder Scrolls as we await Elder Scrolls 6. Believe it or not, Skyrim does have a really nice complete in box copy here. As you'll see on the back of the box, I almost opened it up. I got ahead of myself there. Hold on, I gotta slow down here. Let's read the back. An epic fantasy reborn. The next chapter in the Elder Scrolls saga arrives from Bethesda Game Studios, the makers of 2006 and 2008's Games of the Year. Skyrim reimagines and revolutionizes the open world fantasy epic, which is so true, bringing to life a complete virtual world open for you to explore in any way you choose. The legendary freedom of choice, storytelling, and adventure of the Elder Scrolls is realized like never before. And it says, dragons, long lost to the passages of the Elder Scrolls, have returned to Tamriel, and the future of the Empire hangs in the balance. As Dragonborn, the prophesized hero born with the power of the voice, you are the only one who could stand amongst them. I really love how this game focuses on war because it gets my head thinking about Elder Scrolls 6, and I think that game's going to be all about the war in Hammerfell. That is my personal prediction. I think they're going to go all out with like massive scale battles, but again, I'm talking like it's another video or something like that. Let's focus on the history here, shall we? Opening up a beautiful complete in box copy, and you guessed it, once more, we have a map, this time of Skyrim. This one in particular, I also remember hanging up in my bedroom. I mean, just, I had it in a video. I had a setup video, and you could see it on my closet wall. I called it the Wall of Nerd, and I only had that poster up because I was just obsessed with Skyrim. You also have here on the inside promotions. You may remember when we were looking through some complete in-box copies of the Fallout retrospective, one of my favorite games ever here in Dishonored. You have on the back here, Prey 2, a game that never came to be, but oh my god, that leaked gameplay. I just wonder what would have been. You have here Skyrim, Dawnguard expansion, Dragonborn expansion, and then even the Elder Scrolls Online getting a bit of a promotion here. How about that? So a lot of history in the promotional material, and Bethesda, of course, knowing like y'all are gonna buy this, right? So we're gonna give you a lot of stuff that you may also want to buy on top of it. Now, the manual for a 2011 game, I gotta say, I'm actually impressed, Bethesda. The fact that they didn't skimp out on this one is kind of crazy to me. There are gameplay screenshots. It does go through the skills here, and you'll see it's much more simplified because then it goes into perks. It's much more simplified and streamlined, which Bethesda was trying to do because their games are becoming more and more popular, and they kind of watered down the more hardcore stuff. You see the dialogue is great, but much more simplified. This is a less thicker manual. The combat here, they break down, which was a big deal back then, that you could use like one hand having magic and one hand having a melee weapon. That was so cool back then, man. Nowadays, people are like, Skyrim's combat sucks, but I still think like it was awesome that they managed to pull that off, where you could heal with one hand and then swing away with the other. My kid brain was going crazy. Continuing on here, we have sneaking, pickpocketing, and lockpicking. I love the lockpicking minigame in this game and Fallout. They're pretty much identical. Alchemy, I thought was a lot better in this game. Enchanting was a lot more simplistic in this game. I think for Elder Scrolls fans who have been longtime fans, they were kind of disappointed with the simplistic nature of Skyrim, but like for me as a high schooler, I was loving it because it was the, outside of Oblivion, the one I really connected with. You can smelt, tan, you can cook. What couldn't you do in this game? Again, asking that question was a common theme amongst all these games. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, a complete in-box copy of the most repackaged game of all time. So what's after Skyrim, right? Elder Scrolls 6, of course. I mean, Skyrim did well, the DLC did well. It's time for a new Elder Scrolls game, as the Fallout community and I were just knocking on Bethesda's door like, yo, Fallout 4, is it time? And they did deliver that. And Elder Scrolls fans got put on the shelf for some time. But don't worry, ZeniMax Online Studios had an answer for you in 2014 in the Elder Scrolls Online, an MMO that was set across the entirety of Tamriel, and one that when it first launched was critically panned. There was potential there, but it was too buggy, too boring, too 1, 2, 3 in the quest lines to be anything of worth. Combine that with a really bad subscription fee, and people were not feeling Elder Scrolls Online. But kudos to Bethesda, this is a trend with them. When their online games don't go well, they hang with them. And the Elder Scrolls Online turned out really good. I actually have videos that went viral of me being some of the first defenders of this game when people were not admitting it was good. To me, the turning point was Tamriel Unlimited. When that came around, they did a one-time payment fee. You buy the game like you would Skyrim, and you get to go online and play pretty much Skyrim with your friends, was a really good selling point. When you combine that with its consistent support, especially nowadays, consistently scary support, where they're just adding DLC after DLC after DLC, like a well-oiled machine. It's constant. Elder Scrolls Online went from a game that a lot of people brushed off and said, no, we can't do online with Elder Scrolls, to something that actually fit, something that actually was great. In fact, sometimes I fire up Elder Scrolls Online like I wish I could with Fallout 76 when I need that brand new Elder Scrolls itch scratched. I'll play the newest expansion. I'll just crawl through a dungeon in first person. What Elder Scrolls Online did was listen to their community continuously. And I know not every online game gets it perfect, but what Elder Scrolls Online did was started to emulate more and more of what the single player experience was like. Do you want to quest on your own and play in first person? You can do that. Was it hotbar combat as you've seen in every MMO game? Yeah, it wasn't that fantastic, and that's where even a series like Elder Scrolls, which never had fantastic combat, it got kind of mundane in that department. But you're there for the story, for being in the world, for interacting with all of these various races, and seeing the entirety of Tamriel come together as one. You could throw hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of hours into Elder Scrolls Online and still not scratch the surface of this ginormous game. It's an MMO that I feel honestly doesn't get enough credit nowadays with the love and support, deservedly so by the way, of Final Fantasy XIV Online and of World of Warcraft to a lesser extent nowadays. I feel like not enough love is given to Elder Scrolls Online, which has, in my eyes, only been on a steady incline. But there were some lows in the days of the Elder Scrolls experimentations, because then in comes, a couple of years later, Elder Scrolls Legends. So now you got Skyrim, it's this big profitable machine, and you start to see the forest for the trees and understand Bethesda went, oh, money. Okay, so we're gonna do an online game with microtransactions in it, and we're gonna do another one, which is a card game that kind of copies Hearthstone, but it's more of a dual lane game. What I will put respect on this game for is that it actually had a story with choice and consequence, and as the choices you made in the game went on, you'd get certain cards for your deck, and there was a very small but vibrant community for this game. Unfortunately, Elder Scrolls Legends no longer exists because the support for the game has been terminated. It just never ever got rolling, unfortunately. People saw clearly what Bethesda was trying to do. The same could be said for the Elder Scrolls Blades, a clear, blatant cash grab following up on the mobile success of Fallout Shelter, a game that I forgot to put in my Fallout retrospective, but that they saw and went, oh, what if we did that with Elder Scrolls? And they made Blades, a game that could have been better than Fallout Shelter, but because of monetization, because of greed, it fell apart. And so now, rightfully so, Elder Scrolls fans have soured a bit, because while they love Skyrim, and they've been sold it 1,000,001 times, they have only been given nothing but online monetization and been told, you're good for your money, and that's really it. But the history of these Elder Scrolls games, it is a bit of a up, and then down. And hopefully Elder Scrolls 6, following up what I think is a fantastic game in Starfield, is a return to the norm, a return to the fantastic focus on scale and scope while maintaining quality that we know and love from the Elder Scrolls series. But it's also a series that's really responsible for why I'm here. While Fallout is what carried my name for a lot of years as I talked about Fallout 4 and all of its expansions and built a community that way, but make no mistake, it was Skyrim that was the first game that made me think, wow, wait, there are people out there that like the same stuff I like? Like, I was always alone in a group of athletes who were very nice to me, but I mean, they were also like not super into the games I was into. Like, they just wanted to play Call of Duty and stuff. So when I found other fellow geeks, it made me feel better about myself, I guess would be the right way of putting it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's the entirety of the Elder Scrolls series. And I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts and your experiences with the Elder Scrolls down below. So please do fire away. With that, take great care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.